American National and Executive Director of Administration of Creekside Missionary in Liberia, Lucas Richards has been taken into police custody for allegedly trying to slit wife Jessica Lloyd's throat on September 14 this year. Police reports suggest that on the day of the incident, Lucas drove Jessica around Dixville and Caldwell. Then he attacked and injured her, leaving her with lacerations on the neck, back of her head, and fingers. Jessica has since been receiving treatment at John F. Kennedy Medical Hospital. There are 4 different accounts of what happened as narrated by Jessica's mother, Mrs. Cynthia Lloyd, Lucas himself, Ernest, Jessica's alleged savior, and finally from Jessica herself. I think it is best for me to walk you all through their individual versions of events so you get a full grip on the whole issue, but be reminded that it is on record that Lucas has vehemently refuted the claims against him that he was trying to hurt his wife, Jessica, and in fact, he bemoaned that he actually was the victim in all this. I will come back to Lucas shortly, but let me first consider Jessica's mother, Mrs. Lloyd's version of events. According to Mrs. Lloyd, Jessica met Lucas through Creekside missions. So the understanding here is Creekside Missionary Church had a school, and that is where Jessica was furthering her education, also where Jessica met Lucas, who later expressed interest in her. Mrs. Lloyd continued that her daughter confided in her about Lucas' interest in marrying her. Jessica was already in love with Lucas, and so she eventually accepted his marriage proposal, and a traditional wedding then followed. Now, this is where the mysteries start to unravel. Lucas already had an American wife, and Mrs. Lloyd revealed that Lucas had told them his American wife was already aware Lucas was wedding another wife, Jessica. Also, Mrs. Lloyd alleged that even though Lucas had initially assured her daughter of his support, Lucas later injected Jessica with poison to terminate her 2-week-old pregnancy. The injection made Jessica bleed profusely, and Jessica was then subjected to medical attention. Now to that unfateful day, Mrs. Lloyd recounted that Jessica was with her at home when Lucas came visiting, with the excuse that he came to make it up to her over her failed pregnancy, and also that he was leaving for America the next day, so he had to see Jessica and her family to render his goodbyes, and that is why she allowed Jessica to go with him. On that day, motorcycle rider Ernest claims he, from afar, spotted Lucas hit Jessica with a metal tool on the head. According to him, right after Jessica had fallen to the ground, Lucas dragged her into the bushes, brought out a knife to slit her throat, and that is where he stepped in. And it was not an easy rescue attempt at all, as Lucas fought him so hard, he said, but everything eased down when he shouted for help and mobs rushed over soon afterwards. Amidst all the chaos, Ernest says he made a colleague motorcycle rider transport Jessica to the hospital to be attended to, as he personally stayed behind to try save Lucas from the angry. Now, Lucas has denied all the allegations against him. Firstly, he denied claims that he was responsible for Jessica's failed pregnancy. Also, on that very day of 14th September, Lucas claimed he went shopping with Jessica for her mother, Cynthia, after an initial request that the mother needed $150. So they went to the supermarket to buy foodstuffs, cornflakes, and milk. On returning, Lucas and Jessica both agreed that he was going to drop her off at a junction, so she took the motorcycle to her parents' home. Just as Jessica stood by the road to charter a motorcycle, while Lucas had also dropped down to fix a flat tire, the next thing Lucas could see was a motorcycle knocking Jessica down into a ditch. At once, Lucas stopped his tire fixing and attended to his lover's aid. And this was exactly when Ernest the rider began shouting that Lucas, was trying to cut Jessica's throat. The mob surrounded them, and even though Jessica was partially conscious and wanted to seek refuge in Lucas' car, she was denied the chance by the same mob who assaulted and robbed Lucas of his mobile phone and money. They also damaged his car. Finally, fresh from the hospital, Jessica rendered her account of how things happened. Jessica said Lucas was edgy the whole time, like he was up to something. According to Jessica, right after they left the supermarket en route back home, Lucas made 2 suspicious stops to pee along the bushes, and in each of these cases, he carried with him a knife with the excuse that he was afraid of potential attacks from snakes. In each of the 2 instances, too, Lucas asked Jessica to accompany him and stand close to him as he eased himself. After 2 unsuccessful attempts to attack her, The two went back inside Lucas' car to continue their journey. They drove past a cemetery, and Lucas insisted they stopped to have a look, as it was a usual practice in the United States. But Jessica declined. Now this is where it gets interesting. At the junction where Jessica was attacked, she did confirm that Lucas was fixing a flat tire of which she had dropped to assist on his request.
She's getting a motorbike to go back home, and I needed to check my back right tire because I've been having a problem with that tire. And
Lucas then told her that she had dirt in her hair, of which he offered to help her remove it. He loosened her hair, and the next thing she could hear was a loud boop sound. According to her, she thought it was the sound of a tire, but all she could feel was she was losing her ground. After she fell, she sorts of experienced a concussion, so she was unable to perceive things clearly hereon. Jessica says Lucas was all over him, as though he was trying to get her back on her feet, and that is only the last thing she remembered. But she did sound protective of her husband, Lucas, and did not outrightly say that Lucas attacked her and tried to slit her throat. Now that we have been briefed by all four parties, let me weigh in on all the arguments. I have found inconsistencies in the story of the writer, Ernest's story. He said he saw Lucas attack Jessica with a metal tool the whole time, but he only intervened at the point where Lucas was dragging Jessica into the bushes. Really? How do we even believe this? Is it that his motorcycle was simply not fast enough, or he was simply playing with all of us? Why did he have to wait that long before he stepped in to Jessica's aid? Especially when he saw the beginning of the whole thing like he claimed. I do not think Ernest's account of things is credible enough. To cast more doubts onto Ernest's story, he said that before he stepped in, he witnessed Lucas hit Jessica with a metal too, but at a distance. Just listen to that. Ernest is nothing more than cooking up stories. I am afraid I want to side with Lucas on this one, especially when he said Ernest was the one who knocked Jessica down and proceeded to shout for backup as though Lucas was the one hurting his beloved wife.
And next thing I know, a motorbike comes out of nowhere and hits her, and she goes into a ditch, because right after this coal tar is like a little extra coal tar on the side of the coal tar. Right after that is just a big ditch.
This is a constant practice of motorcycle drivers in rural areas in Africa. Most of these riders are very young and inexperienced. Worse is, most of them ride these bikes without proper licenses and permits. They hit people and run all the time, and it would not shock me if later police findings suggest that Ernest indeed ran Jessica over with his motorcycle and decided to play the hero by calling for backup. Even if Ernest did not really do it, I think he was definitely protecting a colleague who actually did. These geek riders cannot be trusted. What should be talked about more is how these supposed irate mob of locals picked Lucas' mobile phone and money once they arrived at the scene. Lucas rarely even appeared injured when he granted his interview with the police a while ago. I am not condoning violence, but an angry mob in Africa who have just found a foreigner trying to slit the throat of one of their own definitely would not have spared Lucas' life, let alone hand him over to the police. Now, Jessica's mom's version that Lucas injected Jessica with poison to terminate her pregnancy is nothing but blatant lies. I think Mrs. Lingard was trying to play a game here. I have gathered that though Lucas was due to leave for America the next day, he vowed to return. He was even trying to get an apartment for Jessica and his potential child in Liberia before he left, but Mrs. Lloyd was against the idea of a home for Jessica, who stayed with them. She wanted Lucas to keep giving her money like he had been doing for a while now, all because the longer Jessica stayed with her, the more she was going to benefit from Lucas' pockets. That is some real gold digger vibes. I have also gathered that Jessica was in fact the one who terminated her own pregnancy with traditional concoctions, and that her mom, Mrs. Lloyd, was complicit in the act. Mind you, Lucas was supportive of Jessica keeping the baby, but even though she was in love and had been traditionally wedded, Jessica was still a student. She just was not ready for motherhood. Moreover, Lucas breaking the news of his imminent departure did not sit well with her and her mother. She could not handle the thoughts of being a single parent short-term. She also had fears that when Lucas returned to America, back to his first wife, Lucas would eventually forget her. This is why she terminated her own pregnancy. And she had the backing of her mother, Mrs. Lloyd. I think Jessica and her mom did not expect Jessica to get pregnant that early. They were only after Lucas' money and properties, and so the pregnancy had the potential to destroy everything they had built so far. The motorcycle's accident with Jessica provided a new avenue to further pursue their agenda of going after Lucas' money. Jessica lost consciousness the moment she went down from the hit. She did admit she could not perceive anything properly thereon, so my understanding is that all that she claimed to have seen Lucas do was put into her head by her mom as she laid on the hospital bed. Her story was missing some vital details, not necessarily because she was only recovering from a trauma, but because she was only reporting what her mom had told her to report. I strongly believe Lucas is the victim here. A stranger in a foreign land who thought he had found a beautiful young African lady for a wife, only to now find out he had been played all this while. Well, I hope Liberian police come to the bottom of this as quickly as possible with their investigations and acquit Lucas of this crime he is being wrongly accused of. Or what do you all think? Do you believe he was trying to murder Jessica? And if you do you not think he could have had better options for someone who is accused of poisoning a pregnant woman to terminate her pregnancy? What is your take on Mrs. Lloyd's story? And can Ernest the motorcycle rider be trusted?